Alright, this is the second video for section 6.2 on solving quadratics, and so you might be feeling pretty good about completing the square and the quadratic formula and wondering to yourself just how complicated can the problems get. And because you signed up for Advanced Algebra with Trig Honors, you know that just when you start to feel comfortable, things get a little bit more complicated. So here we go. Your job now is to solve using completing the square the quadratic that I have on the screen. And what you'll notice, the thing that's different here, is that 2 that's in front of the x squared. All right, so I'm going to put a big star here, and you have to remember this, is the only time you can complete the square is if the leading coefficient has to equal 1. And so it's not equal to 1, so we have to make it equal to 1. So what we do is we divide through both sides of the equation by the leading coefficient. So what we get is x squared plus 2x, and then dividing -3 by 2 gives me -3 halves, and I know that I have to move it over to the right side to complete the square, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that in one step. Okay, everything else is the same. We take half of 2 and square it, so the value of 1 is what completes the square here. We add 1 to the other side, right? We write this as a square binomial, right? Adding 3 halves and 2 halves gives us 5 halves. So when we take the square root of both sides, we get plus or minus square root of 5 over 2. And then the last step is to subtract 1 from both sides, and so my answers are as follows. -1 plus or minus the square root of 5 halves. Okay, so a little bit more complicated by adding that leading coefficient, but all we have to do is divide it out. Okay, excellent. So let's go ahead and complete the square again with something that's a little bit more challenging. All right, so in this case we want to solve again for x, but what's different is we have x squared plus 2x plus c equals 0. And so what we want to notice is that our answer will have c in it. Okay, we can't make the c go away like in this case where we get all numbers in our answer. Okay, so we're just going to start out like we always do, and that is to move that c to the other side, right? And so again, this is the same as before. Completing the square on a middle term of 2x gives us 1. And so we get x, forgot to add the 1 on the other side. We get x plus 1 squared equals -c plus 1. Square root of both sides gives us x plus 1, plus or minus the square root of -c plus 1. Okay, last step is to subtract 1 from both sides, and so the answer, which doesn't really feel much like an answer because of that c there, but it really is the answer to our problem. Okay, so those are just a couple of examples of completing the square that can get more challenging. Let's go ahead and now look at a quadratic formula problem that's trickier. And so the example I want you to look at is x squared minus xy plus y equals 2, and your job is to solve for x, and then in parentheses I'll say in terms of y. So just like up here when we were done, we couldn't get that c to go away. When we're done here, our answer will be x equals, and there'll be a y in my answer. Okay, so in order to do this, of course, we're going to set it equal to 0, right? In order to do the quadratic formula to complete the square to factor, we need to set it equal to 0. So I get x squared minus x, I'm going to go ahead and do minus y times x, and then plus y minus 2. Okay, I'm going to put this in parentheses and then take the time to identify a, b, and c. Okay, so a is 1, there's nothing tricky there. B is the coefficient of the x term, so b is actually the variable y. C is the constant, and c turns out to be not just y, but y minus 2. Okay, so look at that and see if that makes sense. All right, so here we go, the quadratic formula. Sorry, b is the opposite of y because of this here. So the opposite of b would be y, and then plus or minus the square root of negative y squared, which is y squared, minus 4 times a times c is the quantity, y minus 2. So we have to use parentheses. And then that's over 2 times 1. Okay? So I'm going to clean up the inside as much as I can. So y plus or minus the square root of y squared, and then I have to, 4 times 1 is 4, but I want to distribute that. So I get y squared minus 4y plus 8 under the square root over 2. And so x is equal to that very messy looking answer. The solutions to this quadratic are in terms of y, and although it doesn't feel like a nice answer, that's the best we can do. Okay, some quick examples of how complicated the problems are going to be. See you in class where we'll get a chance to practice those.